Hey everyone, okay, here we are, English 203, Wednesday, September 16th. Today we're going to review Black Zodiac again, and then just with a little bit of housekeeping, and I'll mention this at the end of the lecture, you're going to go in Blackboard, and I posted our reader response, our first one on Black Zodiac. Uh, and then it looks like we're finished. After this lecture, then after you do the reader response, we're finished with, and we're moving on to Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse 5. And I'll lecture next class, September 23rd, on that, as well as lecture on the elements of fiction. Uh, just to summarize, you can see on the screen, today we're going to talk about Charles Wright's collection, Pulitzer Prize-winning collection, Black Zodiac, in which he imbues it with a number of themes. And in this case, we can see here he mentions time a lot. In fact, I would say time is really a personal aesthetic of his, meaning he mentions it in many of his works, many of his poems. The repetition of language, which he definitely does, and we're going to look at that. We're going to drill deep down on that concept. The structuralist theory, literary theory of called binary oppositions, we're going to speak about that and what that means. And then his personal aesthetics, which I mentioned before, what he tends to do within poetry, how he likes it to look and move and sound, and the themes that he uses, specifically time. Okay, today we're going to continue to look at Charles Wright's Pulitzer Prize winning collection of poetry, Black Zodiac. One of the striking things that stands out to me the most with Wright's work is his repetition of language. With all forms of art, visual art, all forms of creative writing to include novel, creative nonfiction, and most notably poetry, the author or artist utilizes the repetition of image or descriptive language in order to view the work with some effect. In this case, Wright, he's attempting to repeat words that aid in materializing a theme as well as a certain tone. Now, one could attempt to bulldoze through the entire collection, writing down instances the poet repeats images or language. That would take a heightened level of brute force on your part. Luckily, I have the Kindle version of Black Zodiac, so I can do an internal search within the collection by hitting Control F. And I did so, and what I found was interesting. To that end, these are just some of the repeated language and images within Wright's collections. Let's look at them and then explore why. What was the point? What exactly was Wright, the poet, attempting to do through these repetitions? Okay, in his first in the interview that we watched, I think it was about 8 minutes long, he spoke about time, especially how we as humans are all subjected to the passing of time and then the passing of us due to time, due to its weight upon us. This is definitely a theme that Wright often grapples with in his poetry, how the human condition is a victim of sorts to time, and how time affects our everyday mood, state of mind, and psychological disposition. When I do an internal search, the word time appears 27 times. That's quite a few times for a book of poetry that's 85 pages long. So we know this observation in time to the tune 27 is by no means a mistake, but is instead Wright attempting to communicate a reoccurring theme to the reader. Seemingly time, as he writes in the poem Apologio pro vita su, is, quote, the source of all good. Time, the engenderer of entropy and decay. Time, the destroyer, our only begetter and advocate, unquote. The actual title of this collection arose in an interview we watched. Again, think as you embark on writing any essay this semester how the title can assemble greater meaning for the single poem, but also for the breadth of the collection. In the case of the title Black Zodiac, Wright mentioned the idea of the universe, space, the vastness of it all in his interview, this dark cosmos of sorts, or in this case, this black zodiac. He is able to establish another recurring theme initiated by the title of the collection, but reiterated by the repetition of such words as star, which is mentioned 25 times in the collection, dust, which is mentioned 10 times, moon, mentioned 21 times, earth, 10 times, blue, 19 times, sun, 12 times, night, 21 times in the collection, dark, 31 times in the collection, and black, 27 times. And interestingly, light, the thing that's diametrically opposed to black. He mentions light a grand total of 57 times within the collection. All of this is for what reason, though? As we mentioned, all this repetition builds a theme. In this case, the vast cosmos, the human expression upon the universe's canvas, how minuscule and insignificant we seem when etched onto its surface. And without doubt, the grand theme Wright wants to impart is none other than the concept of time. We must come to realize Wright seems to be communicating to us, the reader, without space, without the wonderment of our unknowing, without our compulsion to search out the black vastness, both internal, the black vastness of ourselves, and external, the black vastness of space and time. We cannot wrench back the veil of our surroundings. And I'm using surroundings in a very general sort of way. Ourselves as our surroundings, our family and friends as our surroundings, our deep inner psychology as our surroundings, the truth, if it even exists, of our very meaning. What Wright so succinctly responded in the interview we watched, quote, the exterior landscape reflects the interior and vice versa, unquote. He also referred to this concept as the, quote, if you remember, the metaphysics of the quotidian, unquote. What he defines as the, quote, otherworldly quality of the mundane material world, unquote. But what is that? I mentioned this before. The metaphysics of the quotidian exactly is, what does it mean, though? Metaphysics is defined as being, knowing, identity, time, space, all themes and subject matters conquered by Wright within this and many other of his collections. And then we get quotidian, which is of or occurring every day, daily, commonplace, ordinary. So in this way, Wright is juxtaposing the themes of ordinary to the extraordinary, juxtaposing things of dark and light, juxtaposing themes of internal and external, all in the quest to reveal something about ourselves and the world around us. On a final note, within this collection, Wright mentions at least once every month of the year. And many instances he mentions the months 10 or 15 times. Say October, I think it was mentioned 10 times. So time, the expansion of time, this immaterial thing that is both a source of good and a source of bad, is an important, even crucial theme within Black Zodiac. And as we mentioned before, a major personal aesthetics of Wright's. He writes about time often. These weighted themes that Wright imbues in his work is what I would call, and you should remember this from the list of elements of poetry, his personal aesthetic, as I mentioned from this slide's outset. That is to say, these are the topics, the themes, the tones, the images, the subject matter that Wright has always dealt with and most likely always will. All of this subject matter that we're assessing today can be topics you discuss in the essay on Black Zodiac. Okay, structuralism theory, binary oppositions, another key concept within Black Zodiac, and something that Wright would have been highly methodical about is the inclusion of binaries, or what are called binary oppositions. Think of language that opposes or is vying against its opposite meaning. Light versus dark would be a potent example, the yin versus the yang. Let's go ahead and give this greater context by establishing a more precise definition. A nebular opposition, what we're calling, for our literary purposes, binary system, binary opposition, is a pair of related terms or concepts that are opposite in meaning. Binary opposition is that system by which, in language and thought, two theoretical opposites are strictly defined and set off against one another. It is the contrast between two mutually exclusive terms, such as on and off, up and down, left and right. Binary opposition is an important concept of structuralism, which sees such distinctions as fundamental to all language and thought. In structuralism, a binary opposition is seen as a fundamental organizer of human philosophy, culture, and language. Binary opposition originated in Saussurean structuralist theory. So according to Ferdinand de Saussure, the binary opposition is the means by which the units of language have value or meaning. Each unit is defined in reciprocal determination with another term, as in binary code. It is not a contradictory relation, but a structural complementary one. Saussure demonstrates that a sign's meaning is derived from its context in the group to which it belongs. An example of this is that one cannot conceive of good if we do not understand evil. Paired opposites rely upon a relation with adjoining words. In one of the paired opposites, where removed, the other's precise meaning would be altered. Typically, one of the two opposites assumes a role of being preferable over the other. Further, Peter Fourier discovered that binary oppositions have a deeper or second level binaries that help to reinforce meaning. And I don't want you to get wrapped around the axle on binary oppositions. Just remember that it's language that opposes or is vying against other words within that language, light and dark, big and small, in and out, off and on. And as an example, the concepts hero and villain involve secondary binaries, good and bad, liked and disliked, and so on. For political reasons, the role of certain binaries are often called into question using means of deconstruction. Certain terminology, such as civilized, uncivilized, tends to have connotations applied to specific cultures, which is seen as underlying certain biases. Okay, the way Wright is able to approach binary oppositions, and this is methodical on his part, he has to know he's imbuing his work with binary oppositions. He might not call it that. I'm sure he's aware of it as a literary theory, but I think he's trying to show some sort of balance in the universe by doing so. But he's able to do it through, as I mentioned before, the repetition of certain language. Again, right includes light 57 times. Its binary opposition black 27 times, dark 31 times, and night 21 times. This, we said, is to extract greater meaning by comparing these vying, sometimes conflicted, and even other times complementary terms. To that end, Wright uses the self-referential word me, the word me, 46 times, but the more inclusive word our, 90 times. There's a certain imbalance here. Uh, but to what end? What was his reasoning behind this? Mentioning our 90 and me 46. Uh, Perhaps, and even seemingly, Wright is proffering the greater good of us all over the inclusivity of simply a single entity, the me. Another example, and I'll end with our lesson on binaries with this, is an equilibrium Wright strikes by mentioning the word bad 7 times and the word good 7 times, so equal, as well as with all the chaos, with all the dynamism of everyday dilemmas, Wright seems to be saying there exists a great balance. I feel as if Wright's addressing that same theme, that same brand of equilibrium applied to the human condition, that metaphysical quotidian, as he calls it, that blending of the ordinary and extraordinary with this poem. We can see it here in Envoy. I'll go ahead and read it aloud. Envoy. What we once liked, we no longer like. What we used to delight in settles like fine ash on our tongues. What we once embraced embraces us. Things have destinies, of course. Onliners and downloads mysterious as the language of clouds. My life has become like that, half uninterpretable, half new geography, landscapes stilled in a dumbrated, memory unratcheting, its voiceover, not my own. Meanwhile, the mole goes on with its subterranean daydreams, the dog lies around like rugs, bird nitpick their pin feathers, insects slick down their shells. No horizon honing here, no angst in the anthill. What happens is what happens. And what happened to happen never existed to start with. Still, who wants a life like that? No text and no before, no next and no before, no yesterday, no today. Tomorrow, a moment no one will ever live in. As for me, I'll take whatever wanes. The loosening traffic on the straightaway, the dark and such. The wandering stars, wherever they come from now, wherever they go. I'll take whatever breaks down beneath its own sad weight. The paintings of Albert Pinkham Ryder, for instance, language, the weather, the word of God. I'll take as icon and testament the daytime metaphysics of the natural world, sun on the tie post, rock on rock. Uh, okay, love the language and imagery of this poem, what's going on here. Each a great concept and or subject matter for crafting your own essays within this class, when we actually turn in the essay on Black Zodiac. We get a great balancing act here, whereby Wright is allowing the narrator to see the world through both ends. We see that throughout the poem, but what really emerges for me is the idea of half. Quote, half uninterpretable, half new geography, unquote. This is another personal aesthetic of Wright's, the idea of half. In fact, he mentions it 20 times in Black Zodiac, but throughout many of his books, most notably the one prior to this one, Chickamauga, he mentions half throughout almost the same frequency, if not more, as we see here. So there's great meaning that has to be involved with the idea of half. The poems seem to strike a chord with another literary theory, in this case, post-structuralism. We spoke about structuralism before. Now we're going to talk about post-structuralism, which believes that language is key and that words and sentences do not reflect or represent any external reality. There's a famous surrealist painting by Rene Magritte titled The Treachery of Images. I implore you to look it up, where all we see is a pipe for smoking tobacco, accompanied below it by the words which translate into English as, "This is not a pipe." So a painting of a pipe with the words stating, "This is not a pipe." Magritte later remarked how reliant we've become on the message of the image. How we believe that a painting could possibly really be a pipe is incredulous and even unimaginable to him. The image does not reflect or represent an external world, but is instead only paint organized in some uniform way on a canvas. Similarly, I think if we look at the eighth tercet of this poem, Wright seems, and tercet just means 3 lines, Wright seems to be communicating that same brand of post-structuralist theory, whereby language is unstable and doesn't necessarily represent reality. Here it is. Quote, I'll take whatever breaks down beneath its own sad weight. The paintings of Albert Pinkham Ryder, for instance, language, the weather, the word of God. Like the painting of the pipe being unstable or not having complete fidelity to the actual physical pipe, language, right, seems to be echoing post-structuralist theory here, is unable to interpret and therefore has the ability to break down under its own sad weight. It's interesting to note the weight the title brings to the poem as well. An envoy is a short stanza concluding a ballad or is an author's concluding words. In this case, it seems to be doing that. You can think of ballad as a narrative poem. And also, additionally, we can derive by the poem being, it is the concluding poem of this section, the first section of this collection of poetry. So in that way, it is sort of a concluding ballad, because it's a concluding narrative poem. We, at this point, know, because he's using this as a guidepost to end this section, this first section, and this is really his first movement of what will be like concerto of sorts, and it's probably in some measurable way going to shift to something else, or at least shift in some way as we move forward through these narrative poems into a separate section. Okay, so I enjoyed reading your favorite poem and why that you responded to on Blackboard. I thought I would take this time to share two of mine out of this collection. I'll go ahead and read it aloud. This one's called Poem Half in the Manner of Lee Ho. Sorry, the R was cut off here for in manner. All things aspire to weightlessness, some place beyond the lip of language, some silence, some zone of grace. Sky white is raw silk, opening mirror cold sprung in the west, sunset like dead grass. If God hurt the way we hurt, he, too, would be heartsore, disconsolate, unappeasable. Lee Ho, the story goes, would leave home each day at dawn, riding a colt, a servant boy walking behind him, an antique tapestry bag strapped to his back. When inspiration struck, Ho would write the lines down and drop them in the bag. At night he'd go home and work the lines up into a poem, no matter how disconnected and loose-leafed they were. His mother once said, "He won't stop until he has vomited out his heart." And so he did. Like John Keats, he died believing his name will never be written among the characters. Without hope, he thought himself, that worst curse, unlucky. At 27, at death's line, he saw a man come, in purple, driving a red dragon, a tablet in one hand, who said, "I'm here to summon Lee Ho." Ho got from his bed and wept. Far from the sick rooms, dragon dark, snow stormed the passes. Monkeys surfed the bow trees, and foolish men ate white jade. How mournful the southern hills are, how white their despair, under December's tang blue blank page. What's the use of words? There are no words, for December's chill redaction, for the way it makes us feel. We hang like clouds between heaven and earth, between something and nothing, sometimes with shadows, sometimes without. Okay, again, from the title and even the content of the poem, we get the theme of half. Quote, poem half in the manner of Lee Ho, unquote. That's one concept that's evocative, the idea of all things containing half this, half that, life versus death, light versus dark, etc. This is, as we noted before, a concept and theme that runs the entire breadth of this collection. It permeates it, in fact. Also, I thoroughly enjoyed the wisdom encapsulated in the opening stanza. Quote, all things aspire to weightlessness, some place beyond the lip of language. Again, grappling with language, as we see in other poems. Some silence, some zone of grace. There's some great sounds going on here, with specific regard to consonants, such as the repetition of the S's and P's, and the assonants, such as we see in the repetitions of the A's and the O's, to name a few. The entire poem is packed with sonic manipulation, made available by way of the consonants and assonants. The wisdom, as I mentioned in this poem, of how, quote, all things aspire to weightlessness reminds me of gravity. The weight of the world pressing down upon us, gravity, that immutable principle that maintains the balance of the cosmos. This is also, it seems, especially in light of the collection's ultra focus on time, communicating the idea of how we are sprung from gravity when born, acclimated to its forces as we grow, to adulthood. And then as we get older, we're pulled back towards the dirt of this planet only to become weightless once more as we die and eventually decay. So I think there's a lot of meaning and wisdom in there. Another personal aesthetic of Wright's is translation. He often uses Chinese poets like Liu to enter, extend, or even to triangulate its locus of concern. If you remember what that means, what meaning the poem is attempting to impart. He actually incorporates Liu three more times in this collection in three separate poems. In this way, because Wright is translating and because he's accessing this historical figure, this artifact from the past, Wright is adhering to the postmodern theory, whereby, if you recall, literature, among other arts, borrows from a past artifact with all its already built-in meaning and thrusts it into the present by incorporating it side by side with the current work. He did this by mentioning John Keats in the poem as well. Finally, we get that binary opposition afforded us through structuralist theory. One example being the last tercet. Quote, we hang like clouds between heaven and earth, between something and nothing, sometimes with shadow, sometimes without, unquote. This blending of language, of translations, of halves, of past poets, of various literary theories, in what Wright called in the interview we watched, an accretion of sorts, whereby the artist, in this case the poet, blends various elements together to forge something more complex with greater channels of meaning. Something I feel Charles Wright is adept at in engaging us through this accretion process. Okay, another really great and evocative poem that I really enjoyed was Black Zodiac. So I'll go ahead and read that and then we will talk about it. Black Zodiac. Darkened by time, the masters, like our memories, mix and mix match, and settle about our lawn furniture like air, without a meaning, like air in its clear nothingness. What could we say to either of them? How can they be so dark and so clear at the same time? They ruffle our hair, they ruffle the leaves of the August trees, then stop abruptly as wind. The flies come back in the heat. What can we say to them? Nothing is endless but the sky. The flies come back, and the afternoon teeters a bit on its green edges, then settles like dead weight next to our memories and the pale hems of the master's gowns. Those who look for the Lord will cry out in praise of him, perhaps and perhaps not, dust and ashes though we are. Some will go wordlessly, some will listen their way in with their mouths, where pain puts them an inch and a half above the floor. And some will revile him out of love in deep disdain. The gates of mercy, like an eclipse, darken our undersides. Rows of gravestones stay our steps. August humidity, bright as auras around our bodies. And some will utter the words, speaking in fear and tongues, hating their garments splotched by the flesh. These are the lucky ones, the shelved ones, the twice erased. Dante and John Chrysostom might find this afternoon a sidereal road map, a pilgrim's way. You might too, under the pre-jaundiced outline of the quarter moon, clouds sculling down sky like a narrative for whatever comes, what hasn't happened to happen yet, still lurking behind the stars. 31 August 1995, the afterlife of insects, space graffiti, white holes in the landscape. Such things, such avenues lead to dust and handle our hurt with ease. Sky blue, blue of affinity, blue, waters above the earth. What do the great stories always exist in the past? The unexamined life's no different from the examined life. Unanswerable questions, small talk, unapprovable theorems, long abandoned arguments. You've got to write it all down. Landscape or waterscape, light length on evergreen, dark sidebar of evening. You've got to write it down. Memory's handkerchief, death's dream, an automobile, God's sleep. You've got to write it down. Moon half empty, moon half full. Night starless and egoless. Night blood black and prayer black. Spider at work between the hedges. Last bird call. Toad in the damp place. Tree frog in a dry. We go to our graves with secondary affections. Second-hand satisfaction, half sold. Star charts demagnetized. We go in our best suits. The birds are flying. Clouds pass. Sure, we're cold and untouchable. but we are harbor no ill will. No tooth tune to resentment forks. We're out here and sweet meat. Calligraphers of the disembodied, God's words, wards. What letters will we illuminate? Above us, the atmosphere. The nothing that's nowhere signs on and waits for our beck and call. Above us, the great constellations sidle and wince. The letters undarken and come forth. Your X and my X. The letters undarken and they come forth. Eluders of memory. Nocturnal sleep of the greenhouse. Spirit of the slides and silences. Invisible hand. Witness and walk on. Lords of the discontinuous. Lords of the little gestures. Succor my shift and save me. All afternoon the rain has rained down in the mind. And in the gardens and dwarf orchard. All afternoon, the lexicon of late summer has turned its pages. Under the rain, abstracting the necessary word. Autumn's upon us. The rain fills our narrow beds. Descriptions and element like air or water. That's the word. All right. Another poem that is exemplary of those themes that we spoke about earlier, such as halves, equilibrium, time, and binary oppositions, is what's in this poem. What is called this is actually called the collection's titular poem, as it shares the same title as the collection itself, Black Zodiac. So let's parse some of the elements I just mentioned. There are some dark themes built in through dark language in this poem. Think of theme also affecting tone. So in this case, dark language creates dark themes, especially if they are recurring throughout the collection, which in turn lends itself to dark tone. I would, without hesitation, say that there are some moments where here in the poem, where Wright, the theme is using theme and tone to lend themselves to darkness and even shadow. If we press the content of this poem through the prism of postmodernism, I think, which we can be very successful at doing, we can unpack the history of Dante and John Chrysostom, and even Socrates, that he doesn't name outright, but certainly he's quoting from, and we'll mention that in a second. Dante, as most of us will know, and who Wright likes to quote from, was the 14th century Italian author of the epic poem Divine Comedy, which represents the journey of the soul toward God, with the Inferno describing the recognition and rejection of the sin. So definitely themes and subject matter that the entire collection is addressing. John Chrysostom, on the other hand, was the Archbishop of Constantinople in the 4th century Common Era, who died in exile due to protesting corruption in the Catholic Church. So you can extract some meaning from that. Perhaps, whatever that meaning is, though, we should consider it highly methodical on Wright's part, as he knew that those two artifacts from the past aid in informing us of the poem's ultimate meaning. Also within the line, quote, the unexamined life is no different than the examined life, unquote. We get the idea of halves here by way of the binary opposition of examined and its opposite, right? It's diametrically opposed to the examined, right? So there's a two binary opposing words and ideas. We also get the postmodern stroke due to the borrowing of an artifact from the past, in this instance, the ancient Athenian philosopher Socrates, who was infamous for making this declaration at his trial, where he was eventually found guilty for corrupting the youth and subsequently forced to drink hemlock until his death. So we can really start to see a thread begin to materialize between Dante, Chrysostom, and Socrates. So those things are like death, meaning of life, time, our afterlife, all in the attempt to probe the depths of the human condition. So some of the imagery and language that I was able to notice within this poem also is lending itself, and you should attempt to parse it if you want to write an essay on this. Attempt to lend itself to birds. A lot of bird imagery in there and language that build up to give us this imagery of birds. Okay, here we go. Oh, there he is. There's Lee Ho, deceptively hiding behind my lecture. Questions, as always. Please email me if you have any questions or concerns. Also, please complete the Black Zodiac reader response that I posted to Blackboard. Also, see my instructions via the email I sent with this link on how to post to that response. You have until next class to complete it, so you should have plenty of time to give a really thoughtful, precise, cogent response that has everything completely to do with the text. The better responses are going to incorporate direct quotes from the from the text from Black Zodiac. So just think about that. And don't worry about MLA. necessarily, okay, in text citations and things of that nature. Just as long as you tell me what poem it comes from, I'll be able to look it up if need be, if I can't recall in my head the line. Also, start reading at least half of it, if not whole. Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, his war novel, which is great. I think everybody will enjoy that. We'll get away from this heavy sort of poetry that is uh, Charles Wright's Black Zodiac. And I agree, it was sort of some hard reading because it's infused and it permeates with such so many things, so many artifacts from the past, that postmodern stroke we spoke about, right? That it makes it, you either have to trust it and go with it and not even look it up, or if you're me, you have to look it up because you're inquisitive about what it means, right? What is he trying to layer, to use that accretion term of layering in art within his poetry? So you know it's something because it's intentional on his part. So many binary oppositions, so many dark themes, dark tones, so much meaning that he infuses, so much imagery, dark imagery, right? So just think about those ideas as you're sitting down to figure out what you want to craft for your essay, um, but also uh, think about those ideas as so you won't be taken aback because it'll be on something I covered. The reader response will be on something I covered within our lectures. So I'm not going to throw you a hardball and where you realize, oh, I would even cover this. Now I got to sort of research it. So don't worry about that. It'll be within any of the lectures that we gave. Okay, guys. Good luck. Go listen to this, watch this. Hopefully you watch this YouTube video first to give you some really solid information as you enter the reader response phase of your day. All right, or if you do it today, or just make sure you have it done by next class. You get it submitted by next class. Okay, guys, take care. Talk to you later. Bye.